Okay, so yes. Okay, no problem. They're not going to miss much. We're continuing on looking at ethical theories in this class. We have a few more to get through. We've looked at the big three so far: deontology, utilitarianism, and virtue ethics. Just to give you a little summary again of what those are. Remember, virtue theory it has to do with self-improvement, right? The perfection of the individual. Aristotle's telling us that to be good, to be fulfilled, to be happy and healthy, all of this is part of the same thing. We need to cultivate a certain character in order to achieve this, so he pushes us to do that. Utilitarianism, what did that say? Makes an action moral or immoral?
If it provided a net positive or net negative?
Right, exactly. It's based on the consequences of the person's action. If their consequences produced net positive results, you did a good thing. If it produced net negative results, you did a bad thing. You shouldn't do that. And finally, first we looked at deontology. That was Kant's view. What did Kant have to say about the morality of an action? What is it based on? In layman's terms, what? You don't have to describe the whole thing, but not the consequences of an action, but
Like your intention of it?
exactly, the person's intention. Did you have the right heart posture going in? You acting from the right principles or not? Basically, the intention. Well, today we're looking at an ethical theory that you might say could be compatible with any of these ones that we've already looked at, but it's an ethical theory in its own right that was developed during the 20th century primarily by feminists who thought that philosophy in general and moral philosophy specifically was lacking the woman's perspective. So that's the ethical theory we're looking at today. It's known as the ethics of care. And to do that, we're looking at the philosophy of Virginia Held, who is one of these care philosophers who pioneered this theory with Nell Noddings. So as far as I know, Virginia Held is still alive. She's a feminist philosopher who's interested in ethics and social and political theory. As we'll see, the ethical theory that we're looking at today, the ethics of care, has a critical dimension to it. There's a part of it that is a social philosophy that's very critical of the way that we're currently doing things in Western society. But she's mostly known for pioneering this ethical theory along with Nell Noddings, starting, I want to say, in like the 1960s or 70s, something like that. And since then, other philosophers have picked this up. They've picked up the critical social philosophy that is a part of this view, and they've really run with it. As we'll see, this view has some things in common with progressive politics, progressive theory today. So see if you can notice what those are as we go through talking about this ethical theory. So you don't have to write this down. This is basically just a recap. These are the ethical theories that we've looked at so far. Remember, these ethical theories all think there's a fact of the matter about what makes an action moral or immoral. They just disagree about what makes an action moral or immoral, right? What determines the morality of an action? For deontology, it's the principle or the intention. For utilitarianism, it's the consequences of the action. For virtue theory, we might say it's whether or not your action proceeds from one or more of the virtues. Do you have these dispositions like generosity, courage, honesty, etc.? Well, the ethics of care is going to be providing a different answer to this question: what makes an action moral or immoral? As we'll see, instead of looking at just abstract consequences or just looking at the intention, we're going to look at intention, the person's emotions, the person's values, and most importantly, who the person is responsible for and whether they're showing up in their relationships. It's a very relationship-based ethical theory. So that's where we're headed. To summarize, the ethics of care is based around attending to and meeting the needs of people that we are responsible for. The basic idea is this: we exist in relationship with other people, lots of other people. We exist in relationship to people in this room in a certain way, right? Maybe they're our friends, maybe they're just our acquaintances. We have brothers and sisters. We have parents, grandparents, maybe younger siblings, cousins. Our lives are filled with these different relationships we have to people. Based on the relationships that we have a certain moral obligation to care for that person, to show up in our relationship for that person. Depending on the relationship, that's going to determine the degree of our moral responsibility for that person, right? Ben doesn't have a lot of moral responsibility with regards to caring for me, right? Because, we're not related, we're not really friends, right? I'm just your professor. But you do have more of a moral responsibility to take care of your younger sibling, right? Or somebody that you're really close to. So this view is going to be all about recognizing the needs of the people that we're in relationship with and meeting those needs through care and compassion. It's going to lean hard on emotion. It's going to be an ethical theory that encourages partiality, as we'll see. We shouldn't treat everybody equally. But it's also going to say that we have a general social obligation to care for other people in society too. It's not like we don't have any obligation towards them. We do. It just might not be as much as, say, the obligation we have to take care of our kid or our younger sibling. So it's all about relationships. Contrary to some of the ethical theories that we've looked at this far, like deontology, which tries to screen emotion out of our moral decision making, the ethics of care is going to say, no, like emotion is good. You should feel certain ways about the people you're in relationship with. And you should value certain people. In some sense, your emotions, how you feel about others, what your relationship is to other people, should figure into your moral decision making. For Kant, remember, emotions should have nothing to do with it, right? Self-interest, personal desires should have nothing to do with it. And you might say for utilitarians too, they also encourage, don't let your emotions get into it, right? We're trying to quantify happiness and then increase it, right? Well, this view is going to say, no, emotion is actually a good thing. We need to pay attention to this in moral philosophy. Our decisions, our actions should be backed up by certain emotions. Okay? It's not going to reject emotions like deontology or utilitarianism might. In general, the first two views that we've looked at, deontology, utilitarianism, they're basically trying to apply some abstract moral rule to every situation, right? For Kant, that's, can I universalize my maxim? And if I can't, well, I'm not going to do that thing. All moral actions come from universalizable maxims, right? This is the general rule. It's the general test that we can do. For utilitarianism, it's, what kind of consequence is my action going to produce? Is it going to raise the happiness levels or lower it? This is the abstract rule we're applying. We want to produce net good. That's what we're going to do in this specific situation. The ethicists of care are suspicious that doing moral actions like this, thinking about morality in this way, is actually good and useful. Okay, they're suspicious of applying these abstract rules to very particular context-dependent situations. basically, the ethicists of care don't think that one rule, one principle can be applied to every situation. You need to look at the context. You need to look at the particular situation to figure out what you're supposed to do. You should remain sensitive to the particulars. And thus, the ethicists of care are going to say we shouldn't be impartial when it comes to how we act and who we act for. For example, in Kant's view, he's going to say it doesn't really matter like who you're in relationship with. Like you should just do the good thing. Right? You should just do the good thing. And it doesn't matter if, let's say the person that you're speaking with is your father, and your father's about to do a bad thing. Kant would say you should try to dissuade him from doing that or stop him from doing that. You do the same for a stranger. Well, for the ethicists of care, they're going to say, look, not all relationships are equal. We should care for the people that we're closer in relationship with more. We have more of a responsibility to those people. In other words, we shouldn't treat everybody the same. Behind deontology and utilitarianism is this idea that we should kind of treat everybody the same. The ethics of care is going to say, no, you shouldn't do that. That's not how life works. That's not how life should work. You should be partial. That is, you should value some relationships more than others. You should show up more in some relationships more than others. Does that make sense? For example, the ethicists of care would say if it's between saving me or saving your brother, you should save your brother. Duh. Right? Whereas these other ethical theories that are kind of abstract, they might say, oh, that's an impossible decision. You shouldn't necessarily save one or the other if they're equal distance away from you or something. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, one of the most important features of this ethics of care is its feminist influence. Okay? This was an ethical theory that was created by feminists, by people who thought that, again, the feminine perspective was missing from philosophy. And so the ethics of care bases itself on the experiences and the views of women, particularly those in Western society, because it's basically women in Western society who came up with this view. And so it's not going to be based on these abstract, purely logical rules. This ethical theory falls out of people's actual experiences out there in the world. In healthcare settings, in other care settings, in the home setting. It's based on the real experiences of women particularly. Okay? You can imagine the pioneers of this view, Held and Noddings, saying something like this. There's a real lack of feminine input and insight in moral philosophy. Okay? This isn't a direct quote. This is something that they would say. Okay? Because look at all the ethical theories we've examined so far. Deontology. Who came up with that? A woman or a man?
Probably a woman, but probably not.
A man. It was Kant, right? Utilitarianism. Woman or man come up with that? Right. All the ethical theories that we've looked at so far have been...
White males?
Exactly. Yeah. It's all been white males who have come up with it. And the ethicists of care are going to say, look, if you look at the history of Western philosophy, actually, all the people that we ask students to read, all the people that we say are the great philosophers, they're just a bunch of old dead white dudes. So there's some diversity of perspective missing here, is what they're going to say. And they're trying to ameliorate that, okay, by providing an ethical theory all of their own. Like a lot of other, what we might call critical theories or critical philosophies, the ethics of care is going to utilize systemic thinking. It's going to look at social structures. It's going to look at the structure of human relationship in society. And they're going to utilize this way of thinking to outline social issues and basically provide a critique of Western society, of where care is lacking, of how we can show up better in our relationships, of how our society is skewed unfairly and unjust, and you might say oppressive, and all these different things. You might think that the ethics of care in this regard, insofar as it provides a social critique of Western society, is the precursor to a lot of the progressive views and theories we're hearing about today. Right? But the important thing to get from this slide is that this is a feminist ethical theory. That's the important take-home point. Okay? Now, what exactly is this ethics of care? How does it say we should think and act? Well, let me tell you about it. Again, it is an ethical theory. It's going to tell us what makes an action moral or immoral, but it is also what we might call a critical social philosophy. It is going to provide a critique of Western society, like all critical theories do, right? Which try to critique the culture and the society that is the target of their analysis. One of the things that it's going to be critiquing is this thing called liberal individualism, which is this idea that has become popular since the founding of our country, for example. This idea that we are all separate, autonomous, rational beings that aren't really connected to anybody else, that we can become a self-made person if we want. All we have to do is pull ourselves up by our bootstraps. Like a lot of other critical philosophies, the ethics of care is going to criticize this view that we're separated from each other, that we are not impacted by what's going on in society, that our identity or that our actions are not socially informed. Okay? It's going to criticize that idea. Instead, they're going to say, no, we are all rather interconnected and interdependent as members of society. No one is actually separate from anybody else socially. And here's basically what they're trying to get at. Look, this liberal individualistic idea basically tells you you're separate from everybody else, you can do what you want, you're not really dependent on anybody else to live or survive. Basically, your life is just a matter of how you direct it through your sheer will. And they're going to say, no, that's not actually how society works. Okay? Rather, you wouldn't be able to do what you're doing now if it weren't for the actions and the behaviors of all these other people in society. For example, you're here getting a college education, right? In order for you to do that, you're relying on a whole bunch of other people to do their thing. To keep the lights on, for example. To keep the Wi-Fi network running. To keep the pipes in order. The electricity working in your room. To clean all of this stuff. Your success, your life depends on people doing all of this stuff. Okay? That's what they're going to say. And so they're going to say, look, we're all interdependent and interconnected. Okay? No one is completely separate from anybody else. Our success is basically provided or it's made possible by everybody doing their thing here. Economists, teachers, plumbers, electricians, ditch diggers. Everybody is working together to make our lives possible. And that's something that we need to think about, they're going to say. Here's what Held has to say about it. The liberal individualist conception fosters the illusion that society is composed of free, equal, and independent individuals who can choose to associate with one another or not. It obscures the very real facts of dependency. For example, every person starts out as a child dependent on those providing care to this child, and we remain interdependent with others in thoroughly fundamental ways throughout our lives. That we can think and act as if we were independent depends on a network of social relations making it possible for us to do so. So the clearest example of what the feminist ethics of care people are trying to get at is this. We're all children once. That means that we couldn't take care of ourselves. We had to rely on people to take care of us, right? We couldn't feed ourselves. We couldn't change our own diapers, right? Somebody provided you an education, took care of you, made sure that you didn't die when you were crossing the street, right? So you were dependent on people when you're a child. As you get older, you start to think you're not dependent on anybody, but actually you're dependent on a lot of people in order to do what you're doing in your life. That's what they're trying to say. And so the ethics of care, to summarize, seeks to reveal the importance of human relationships in our lives, our dependency on one another, and where and how our social systems are failing to sustain human relationships, and to recognize the importance of human relationships. The ethicist would say, for example, it's a tragedy that more people don't understand how they are dependent on others for their success, for their lives, to have the things that they have, right? You wouldn't have the laptop that you have if people didn't make it somewhere. You wouldn't be able to eat the food in the cafeteria that you're going to do later today if somebody didn't cook it for you, right? And so their basic idea is we all exist in this network of social relations that support us, that keep us up and make our lives possible. The problem is that we don't recognize this. We're not allocating resources properly to maintaining this network. We have this liberal individualist conception that's blinding us from what's making our lives possible. And so, in some way, we can say that the ethics of care is kind of outwardly focused. Okay? Think about virtue theory for a second. Virtue theory is all about improving yourself, right? We talked about David Goggins, like face your fears, be strong, make yourself the best that you can be, right? It's about individual self-improvement. Well, the ethics of care is more about showing up in the relationships that you're in with other people, caring for other people. It's not so much about yourself. It's not so much about improving yourself. It's more so about meeting the needs of others, helping them out, supporting them. But Held wants to make it clear that the ethics of care is not all about just meeting other people's needs. You also do have to meet your own needs, right? I'm sure you've heard it before. You can't take care of someone else unless you take care of yourself first, right? They recognize that too. And so they're going to say following the ethics of care is both self-interested and altruistic. Through caring for others, we're actually doing something good for ourselves. Not only does it make us feel good, but we're helping to maintain this network that we're relying on to make our lives possible. Right? And so she says, persons in caring relations are acting for self and other together. When we help out our fellow neighbor, when we do something nice, for the janitor or for our mom, for our brother, for the person who, cleans the bathrooms in the dorm, we're helping them out and we're helping ourselves out. Because through their actions, they're helping to prop us up in some small way. Does that make sense? Okay. I'm going to take that as yes, you're all excited and interested in following along. And so, what does it mean to care for someone? The ethicists of care are going to say what we need to do is we need to care for people. We need to show up in our relationships. Well, there's basically two parts to this. Okay? Caring for someone, being good, being moral, involves having the proper values and emotions, and it means doing the proper things. That is, care is both a value and a practice, or what we might call feeling and labor. When you're properly caring for someone, that means you have the proper view about them, you feel the right way about them, and then you're actually doing something. You're actually doing stuff. It's both. It's not just one or the other. Let's say you care about your sister. Okay, you want her to succeed, but you never do anything for her. That's not caring for her. Okay? Or let's say you never talk to your sister. You don't really feel one way or another about her, but you give her money. You know, if she's sick, you take care of her, but you just do it out of obligation. You're just doing it because it's right. They would also say that's not proper care. You need to meet people's needs if you can, and feel a particular way about them. Value them. Feel happy for them. Want them to succeed. Does that make sense? So, you got to have the right mindset and you got to do the proper actions. That's what it means to care for someone. It is not the same as paternalism. What is paternalism? Yeah. Being a parent to someone. Can you provide an example of that?
Like giving advice and kind of directing somebody on like path, I feel like.
You think so? Here, maybe this is a better example. You're eating a Snickers bar, and I know that that's not good for you, so I come over to you and I take it away. I'm like, you don't get this fucking Snickers bar. That's bad for you. Can't have that. That would be like being a parent, right? Like intervening in your life, preventing you from doing something, even if I think it's going to harm you, right? Or being a parent often involves like making kids do things they don't want to do, or coercing adults to do things you want them to do, right? That's kind of what being paternalistic is like. In a sense, it means taking their freedom away from them, right? Care is not that. For example, you have a son, okay? You really want him to get into sports because you think, look, sports are going to be good for him. He's going to get exercise. He's going to learn team building. He's going to have competition with other boys. That's going to be good for his psychological development. So you're like, I'm going to put him in football, okay? He doesn't have a choice in this. He's going into football. The ethicists of care are going to say, that's not caring for him if he doesn't want to be in football. Like, you want all these things for him, but you're forcing him to do this thing that he doesn't want to do, that his heart isn't in. That's not caring for him. Caring for him would be maybe if he wants to be, in dance, putting him in dance. Why? Well, because that'll probably serve some of the same goals, right? It'll help him interact with others. He gets to do what he loves to do, so that's going to improve his mood, right? He's getting physical activity. Yeah.
What if you're like forcing your kid to like brush their teeth and they really don't want to or eat vegetables? Like,
That's a great question. What do you think?
it's not caring for them. I don't know.
You don't think so?
Well, I think so, but like Virginia Health might disagree on that.
This is a difficult point, and it's actually one of the questions that I bring up later. What does proper care look like? I think intuitively we want to say you do have to force your kids to do some things. Now, should you force an adult to do anything? Maybe, maybe not. That's where it starts to get a little tricky, right? It's easier when it comes to kids because it's like, look, kids don't know what's good for them. They haven't developed the proper habits, right? They want to do dumb shit like eat Legos or have 12 ice cream bars for dinner. You're like, no, little Joey, you're not going to have 12 ice cream bars for dinner, okay? Dad's not going to allow that. So with kids, I think it's a little more cut and dry. I think the ethicists of care would say, when it comes to kids, yeah, forcing them to do some things is caring. But forcing them to do things that aren't necessary, that isn't good for them, that's not caring. Like the football thing, maybe. Maybe that's not caring, but forcing them to eat their vegetables is. I think they'd probably follow that line. Or brushing their teeth. Yeah.
You answered my question, but I was just going to say, like earlier today, I saw something about this parent was like getting their kid on a really healthy diet for like a few years, hoping to develop good habits with them.
Yeah.
And there was a bunch of people making comments and like, oh, you're forcing your kid to do all this and that. Meanwhile, like the alternative is eating a bunch of junk food and all this stuff that isn't really good for them and could make them turn out to have worse habits as they develop and grow.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, what people are kind of split on like what you do in a situation like that. It's becoming more popular now to give children a lot more freedom over what they do. But I think the ethicists of care are going to say, and they might justify it this way, they might say you do have to make your kids do some things because that's meeting their needs. And these other things that they want to do are not going to meet their needs, whether those are psychological, nutritional, whatever. Yeah, Sean, what were you going to say?
I was going to say, I mean, there are also different types of parenting if we're going this route too. I mean,
yeah.
You leave out nowadays people, for example, leave out a jar of candy, free range, holiday any day. I mean, after a while, it's not going to be a treat anymore. So you'll be like, whatever. I mean, if I want candy, I want candy. But like, what was the last thing we were talking about?
Forcing your kids to do things or depriving them of other things, right?
Yeah. So like, I mean, there are certain things you probably should force your kids to do, but in a way that I feel like force is such a strong term. I mean, you can...
Sure. Maybe incentivize.
Yeah, or like even manipulate is a stronger term.
Yeah.
But like there are ways around it where you can get your kid to brush your teeth every night and set a schedule without being like, hey, if you don't do this, your teeth are going to...
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I would say, look, there are a bunch of different parenting styles. I think there are a bunch of ways to get kids to do things without dragging them by the hand, right? And, maybe we're going to want to lean into those. Maybe instead of saying, if you don't brush your teeth, I'm taking away your Pokemon cards. We say, look, if you brush your teeth, I'll let you do this thing. Incentivize them a different way, perhaps. Yeah, there's definitely room for that. In any case, the point here is caring for someone is not just ordering them around. It's not just forcing them to do things. It's more nuanced than that. Okay? Part of what it involves, and this is what I was trying to get into with the dance example, the football example, is promoting other people's interests and desires. People have some sort of psychological need, right? To be accepted, to be loved, to be supported, right? Think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. When you care for a friend, that doesn't mean shitting all over their hobbies. Okay? Say you have a friend who's really into Magic the Gathering, the card game. Okay? Like I am. Best card game ever. Caring for that person isn't constantly hounding them about the fact that they like the game and calling them a nerdy bitch. Okay, that's not caring for someone. Caring them is like, oh, you like Magic? Like, cool, you want to tell me about it? Yeah, like, what? So why do you like it? And then you get them talking and they're really they're happy and excited to tell you about what they're interested in. That's more what care looks like. Okay, it's not bullying someone. It's not trying to suffocate their desires. Sometimes it involves, directing them in a particular way if their desires or if their interests are bad. But mostly, if they're harmless or if they're good, it involves promoting their desires and interests, okay? Showing an interest in them. In general, caring for someone means being responsive to all of their needs, okay? Physical, psychological, spiritual, whatever it is. Now, this doesn't mean that we need to kill ourselves meeting everybody's needs. Okay? What it means is we care for somebody, we're responsive to their needs, we try to meet their needs to the degree that we are obligated to do so. And that's going to be dependent on our relationship with them. Right? None of you are on the hook for meeting my needs, my psychological needs. Okay? Maybe you're on the hook for showing me some sort of respect because I'm your professor, but you are not on the hook for being my therapist, right? Because that's not our relationship. You are going to be more on the hook for caring for your friends than you are for me, right? For looking out for them, maybe caring for them when they're sick, or letting them vent to you when they're upset. But it's going to depend on the nature of the relationship, okay? The ethicists of care describe their view this way: more receptive, intuitive than objective, analytic. What do you think objective, analytic means? Or if you could connect it to one of the philosophers we've looked at so far, who's like this? Who's objective, analytic? There's one thinker that stands out in my mind. Aristotle, or think of another one of the white guys.
Doesn't narrow it down.
Who could you not understand at all that was like using really technical language? Kant. Right? Kant is objective analytic. He's trying to solve morality. Okay? He thinks, right, we can figure out what's moral just through reasoning about it, just by thinking about it. We're going to be objective and logical and rational creatures. Okay? That's Kant. Right? Very analytic, analyzing everything, and trying to be impartial. Right? Everything has to be by the book, strict, objective, don't let your emotions get into it. Caring for someone is not like this. They're going to say caring for someone is more about being receptive to what they're saying, how they're acting, and intuiting what they need. It doesn't mean being extremely logical and using reason all the time in your relationships. Like, for example, your friend Jenna is upset that Greg cheated on her. Okay? And you want to solve her problem. You want to make her, happy again. Maybe the objective thing to do, the objective, rational thing to do is, tell her, well, part of the reason why you're upset is, look, you kind of had this coming because you knew Greg was a cheater, and you need to understand, why this happened and all this stuff. The ethicists of care are going to say, no, you don't go on a spiel like that. You sit down, you listen to Jenna, you let her vent. You don't always do, the objectively rational thing, or what seems objectively rational to you. You take it on a case-by-case basis. To care for someone, you rely on your intuition of what the person needs at that time, at that stage, and their sadness or whatever it is, right? And finally, because it is a feminist theory, because it does have a critical social element to it, it's also going to take stock of the privilege and lived experiences of people. So, let's say you have two friends. One of them's Mark Zuckerberg. The other is your girlfriend, Haley. Okay, and Haley comes from an underprivileged background. She doesn't have a lot of resources available to her, doesn't have a lot of money, but she's at school with you. She's trying to get an education. Haley and Mark Zuckerberg both text you at the same time, and they're like, hey, I'm having a really bad day. could I talk to you? Like I need somebody to vent to. Who do you think you're supposed to go ahead and call? Mark Zuckerberg or Haley? Haley. That's what this ethical theory is going to say. They're going to say, look, fucking Mark Zuckerberg, he has all the therapists in the world. He has all the money in the world. Look at how great his life is. You should probably take care of Haley first. Okay, she doesn't have the same resources, the same privilege, the same access to psychological help that Mark Zuckerberg does. Okay? So, they're going to say, when we're trying to care for people, when we're showing up in our relationships, part of what needs to be figured into that is the privilege, the positionality of the person that we're interacting with. Does that make sense? Because sometimes we're going to have to make decisions about who to care for first, right? Who to prioritize. So that needs to play a role in our decision making. Okay, got it? Sound good? All right, sick. Let's keep going. Thus, if we were to summarize it, the ethics of care is focused on cultivating and exercising attentiveness in our relationships, trust, empathy, responsiveness to need, sensitivity to particular situations, and caring relations in general. Basically, we need to show up in our relationships. Okay? If somebody in our life is struggling, we should be there for them instead of watching CoffeeZilla on YouTube. Okay? Or playing Roblox or whatever it is. I don't fucking know. We need to become better listeners, empathizers, better people who are able to hold space for the others in our lives. Okay? That's what it's trying to push us to do. Because the ethics of care thinks that care is unequally distributed. It thinks that relationships are suffering in our society. It thinks that we could all be better people when it comes to our relationships. We could provide for others much more than we are now. And so it's trying to push us towards that. Here is how I would define it. We provided definitions for all the other views. Let's do that for this one too. The ethics of care is the view that the morality of an action is determined by the degree to which that action cares for others and deepens our relationships with them. This ethical theory is all about relationships. Are we showing up in our relationships? Are we caring for others? Are we strengthening them and deepening them? Or are we letting our relationships fall to the wayside, dissolve, and die? Because they're going to say society depends on relationships. We're all in relationship to varying degrees with each other. Relationships make the world go round, right? Everybody would die if they weren't in a certain relationship with the people taking care of them when they're a kid, right? So relationships are important. That's what we should care about. It's not that hard, right? Pretty simple. Less confusing than Kant's, I hope. Now, all of this has certain implications for society. What society is like now, where we want it to go, where it should be headed. Okay? What the ethics of care reveals to us, if you really get down into it, you really analyze relationships in society, is that currently our society is not based on an ethics of care. Right? Are people really that loving and respectful and nice out there in the world? Or are people rude and dismissive and self-interested? How about your boss? How nice is your boss to you? Do they check in when you're having a hard day? or your other employees? How about your professors? Are your professors asking you how you're doing? I could probably be doing that better, but I have so many fucking students. Sorry, everybody. How about how our economies are run? How politics is handled? Do people really care about each other? Do you think politicians really care about the American people? The basic idea is this. People are self-interested, greedy, and mean. In our society, our relationships aren't based on care. They seem to be contractual, right? I do something for you, you do something for me. That's kind of how our relationship works, right? I'm giving you a lecture so that you can get an education. You're filling up seats so I can get money, right? Now, hopefully our relationship is a little bit more than that, but you see what I mean? Relationships in our society, they're going to say, are more based around, I'll scratch your back if you scratch mine, rather than showing love and empathy and giving, okay? Rather than being graceful and gracious. To repeat what I said earlier, they're going to say care is not equitably distributed in society or in and outside the home. Who make up the majority of caring professions? Men or women? Women. Women make up the majority of people in caring professions, right? Think nurses, hospice care, if somebody needs to stay at home with the kids, who does that more often? Who ends up caring for their parents more when they get older, men or women? The ethicists of care are going to say, look, women are taking on the lion's share of all of this caring, all of this necessary caring that needs to be done. And part of their view is like, hey, men, you need to step up. You need to be willing to talk about your feelings. You got to be willing to care for your bros. Okay? And other people too. Remember, this is in part a critical social philosophy, so it's going to have some critical things to say about society, right? And about how it's organized. And so we would like to see care more equitably distributed, more people taking up the burden of caring for others, right? So that women don't have to do all the work. So that women aren't the only ones who have to stay at home with the kids, so on and so forth. In general, they're going to say Western society really doesn't seem to value care much at all. Because it doesn't, right? What does our society value? Money, right? Fame, power. That's what it cares about. For some people, it's knowledge, right? Knowledge is what matters, or expertise. But love? Nah, who gives a shit about love, right? If it's not making me money, if it's not furthering my brand, why would I care about other people, right? Check out my Patreon for... No, just kidding. I don't have a Patreon. So, they're critical of society, and they want to see society changed in all these different ways surrounding care. In general, the ethics of care is attempting to get us to cultivate flourishing relationships, and hopefully that will allow us to transform society from prioritizing economic concerns, money, wealth, property, capital, to human concerns. Actually, what people need, their psychological needs, their spiritual needs, their biological needs, right? Because a lot of the ethicists of care are going to say things like, we have the ability to care for everybody in society. We have the money. We have the infrastructure. But what are we doing? We're just allowing money to continually be channeled to, all these billionaires who aren't giving the money back. And that's not good. Our society values money more than it actually values human people. That's why all these people are dying in the streets. That's why people are homeless. That's why people have all these drug problems. Nobody cares about them, right? Nobody's trying to get them help. So on and so forth. And because our society is organized in this way, it's organized mostly around making money, self-interested things, building lives for ourselves, looking out for number one rather than looking out for others. The ethicists of care say that instituting this would require drastically changing society, its values, its priorities, its practices, and its institutions. Because look, what is this place? What are other colleges and universities? They're businesses, right? Are they actually in the game to care and help others? I don't know. Maybe some. But the majority of them, right, they're businesses. In fact, the ethicists of care are going to say probably the majority of the institutions we have are acting like businesses, and that's not good. They should be acting more empathetically, more lovingly. But in order to get people to actually follow the ethics of care, a bunch of shit would have to change. Okay? We'd have to change people's minds and hearts. We'd have to change economic policy, social policy, law, etc. It would require a drastic change. So instituting this would not be easy because our society is so far away from this ideal of everybody caring for each other. Here's what Held says. Instead of a society dominated by conflict, restrained by law, and preoccupied with economic gain, we might have a society that saw as its most important task the flourishing of children and the development of caring relations, not only in personal contexts but among citizens, and using governmental institutions. And we would see that instead of abandoning culture to the dictates of the marketplace, we should make it possible for culture to develop in ways best able to enlighten and enrich human life. Instead of seeing the corporate sector, military strength, and government and law as the most important segments of society, deserving the highest levels of wealth and power, a caring society might see the tasks of bringing up children, educating its members, meeting the needs of all, achieving peace, and treasuring the environment as most important. So you can see what they're saying, right? You can see what they're after. The ethics of care is all about responding to and meeting the needs of people that we're responsible for. And as members living in a society, we're partly responsible for the welfare of everyone, but that's going to depend on our relationship, right? We're more responsible for the people closest to us, who depend on us. What it means to be moral, on their view, is to show up in those relationships, is to be loving, is to be a good listener, is to care about others, is to be working towards certain social goals. That's what it means to be a moral person. That's what the ethics of care is pushing us to do. It's not focused on individual self-development. It's focused on improving conditions for everybody. Okay. So what do you think of this view? Is this a cool view? Do you like it? Do you think it's shit?
I like it.
You like it? Will you say more about it? Why do you like it? It makes sense, yeah, to have a happier world for everyone, for sure. It's nice to care for people, right? To love people, to try to meet their needs, right? Wouldn't the world be a better place if everybody did that, right? You can't overthink what you have to do. Why? Because it's simple. It's just like, hey, be a better bro to your bros, be a better brother, be a better son. Yeah? Yeah, pretty simple.
It kind of takes the, I don't know, it just seems mechanical and robotical. So analytical with the other ones. It doesn't actually have the sense of emotion and thinking to it.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
and, I mean, it makes you look at the bigger picture of everything else. I mean, all the other ones kind of did, but like, I don't know, this one seems to be more organic.
Yeah. Yeah, you might say more organic, less, objective, analytic, or more human. Right? Because, I mean, look, what is society made of? What does it depend on? Real human people with real experiences, with real needs, right? Life isn't just a bunch of numbers or abstract principles. It's love, it's fear and pain and relationship, all these human things. Yeah. What do the rest of y'all think? How does this compare to the other views? Do you like it more or less than the other views? More? Will you say more, Georgia?
Yes.
Go on.
Oh, you want me to say more?
Yeah.
I just think that it just makes sense. Like, I totally agree with, like, the capitalistic, like, mindset of America. Well, I don't agree with it, but I just, like, definitely see it.
That's how our society works, and that's what people are geared towards. It's like making money, this stuff.
But I'm like a political science major, so like I see that like a lot firsthand, and I just think that like if we definitely like cared about each other more and like prioritized things would be better. But I also like think that's a huge change in like the way that we have like our government system set up now. It's like not geared towards that at all. It would be like a huge mindset change, but I definitely think it's like the best one so far.
Okay, you like it the best.
Yeah.
I think even if you were looking at it from like a business owner's perspective, this is a better way to do business because you're going to build relationships with customers that want to get back to you, companies perhaps that want to help you out if you help them out.
Yeah, so you could see, like, if you're looking at this even from kind of an economical perspective, right, you might say, like, yeah, this is kind of the way to go, right? If you're nice to people, you know, if you show an interest in them and your customers, if you treat them fairly, if you develop relationships with them, that's a win-win, right? You might say a lot of companies are doing dumb stuff now by not instituting something like this, right?
Yeah, I also think like businesses would be better off if they looked at doing business as like building a community and not so much just providing for a specific group of people or a specific audience.
Yeah, that would definitely be a radical shift from how a lot of businesses operate now and think, right? They're just providing a service for money, right, or a good for money, whereas maybe they would be more successful and maybe the world would be a better place if they actually thought about, instead, we're trying to build something that's going to last, where people can network, where people can talk, where people can spread news about our product or service. Yeah. Does anybody dislike this view? Or parts of the view? Right? I think there are some things in every view that we've looked at that y'all have liked and some things that you haven't liked.
I really like this view, but I just feel like it will be like impossible because I just feel like people don't care enough.
Yeah.
I will say it because like I just feel like people don't care enough to like change, and like I don't know, some people are a little too lazy and just like they don't want to change their mindset. But I do like the view. Like I wish that's how things were, but I just don't think it would ever happen.
So you think like, look, the ideas here are good, but this is like idealistic.
Yeah, because I just feel like there's a lot of people that need to act like this. Like the whole society would need to act like this, and I just don't feel like that's
Yeah, or the vast majority of people, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, how do you change people's minds and hearts after years of conditioning?
Yeah.
Right, and incentivizing them to do and think certain things.
Well, the idea of like this theory is good. I don't necessarily think it's sustainable because if you spend all of your time focusing on caring on others and the needs of others, your battery's going to run out very quickly.
Okay. So that's a good point. I should make that clear. It might be that what is involved in care is doing some of that stuff. You know, like, for example, the person who works at like, you know, a waste treatment facility. You could say, well, one way to interpret care is you should quit your job and, go live with your sister and take care of her or something. But another way that you can think about this view is, like, look, you can take care of the water supply and make sure it takes out all the contaminants in a caring way and care for society's members that way. So I think we could say that the ethics of care would support people doing those kinds of things. But it is definitely saying that we're not being as good as we could be in our personal relationships too. That is also a big part of it. Yeah. But yeah, that's a good question. That actually leads us into the first consideration that I have here. Because it's not clear, right? This view is a little vague, and it needs to be a little vague because it needs to be context dependent, right? What does proper care look like? Really? Is this easy to figure out all the time? Yes?
I think that's what this theory is kind of saying, which we talked about before, was that there is no sort of like one way to care for somebody because it's subjective to each person. So you would care more for your brother, like you said, than you would care for, I don't know, like somebody that we don't know in this class.
Yeah.
So there's no really like descriptive definition that would define care.
Right. And in some ways that can be a good thing because it allows for flexibility, right? But in another way, if it's not clear what care is, we're going to be faced with choices that we don't know how to make or what choice to make, right? Let's say your best friend is starting to drink a lot more. Okay, Haley's starting to drink a lot. She's going out, she's partying a lot, not only on the weekends, also on the weekdays. She's starting to have shakes in the morning, go through some withdrawals. What does properly caring for Haley look like? Does it look like taking her bottle away? Or no? What do you think? I see a shaking of a head and I see a nodding. Like, right, we're already disagreeing about what proper care looks like for Haley. Right? Or what does care look like for somebody who's suffering a lot from a mental illness? Let's say they have schizophrenia. Do you force feed them their medication if they don't want to take it? Or do you just let them not take it and then, kind of do things that are going to harm themselves and others? These are really hard questions, right? Like, it can be really hard to figure out what it means to properly care for someone. In some instances, it's really easy, Oh, Jenna needs a shoulder to cry on. You do that for Jenna, right? What do you do when Jenna is suffering from a mental illness or when she has a substance dependency issue, right? What do you do, right? What do y'all think about this? This is a real problem, right? I'm sure you're faced with decisions like this every day. Like, what should I do for this person? How do I actually help this person? We're having debates about this in terms of social and economic policy all the time, right? So this is a serious question. Because the ethics of care wants to be flexible, wants to be partial, it doesn't provide a definition of care. And so that leaves us with some ambiguity about what it means to care for people. That's one thing we might want to think about. Or how about this? Did you see any sentences in here about exactly who we are responsible for and to what degree? We were talking kind of all loosey-goosey the whole time, right? I was saying things like, yeah, we're in relationship with everyone. To some degree, we're responsible for everybody in society because we're interconnected with them and their happiness is interconnected with ours. But again, the ethics of care is not extremely clear on who exactly we're supposed to care for, how, to what extent. Am I really responsible for somebody who lives on the other side of the country, who has an underprivileged life? Do I have a moral obligation to donate to a charity that would help them or not? Do I have moral obligations to care for people in other countries? Do I need to donate to Oxfam? Do I need to go become a member of the Peace Corps and help people out in Africa? What do you think?
If it's based off of like personal experiences, should it be an intuitive thing? Like,
Yeah.
if you feel sympathetic or empathetic towards a certain cause, like, and you feel that's the right thing to do, that you should do it.
Well, here's the problem, right? A lot of progressive people, for example, and ethicists of care are going to say, all of us in United States society have certain social obligations. But not everybody agrees with that, right? That's not intuitive to them. But they're still going to say, look, you still have a social obligation, for example, to support reparations. Or you have some sort of obligation, to support more social safety net programs. Talk to your parents, talk to your grandparents. They're probably not in support of that, right? That's probably not intuitive to them. They're like, look, I worked hard. I did what I needed to do so I could buy a house. These people aren't doing what they need to do, right? That's how some people think. So, the kinds of problems that these people want to solve when they're talking about social issues would require a mass effort. And not nearly enough people are on board, they're going to say. And so they're going to try to change your minds, but the question remains, what kind of obligation do I have to the average person on the street? To somebody I've never met? To the homeless in downtown Pittsburgh? Does proper care look like going down and volunteering at the soup kitchen? Does it look like donating almost all of my clothes? Does my obligation extend that far? Should I donate all my money, or do I not have to? Do I only have to donate $1?
I don't really know about that, but I was going to say
Yeah.
that the one thing that's kind of like throughout each of these series is the care for children.
Right.
So
Right.
every reading pretty much, it pretty much says at the beginning that children be cared for, they can't care for themselves. So no matter what the theory is, it's almost that every philosopher is kind of just saying that it's pretty much a basic thing to care for children because they can't care for themselves. So I don't know, I guess like everybody else is saying, it's really subjective to yourself if you want to care for like other adults and people who are less fortunate than you. But the main point is caring for those who just physically can't.
That should be our priority, maybe. Is caring for children. Because you could say, look, maybe a lot of people are in the situations that they're in because they were not properly cared for as a child. Right? I think you could make a good case for that for a lot of people. Right? Yeah. So yeah, that's a good point. One of the things that unites these views is caring for children. Maybe if we want to see long-term positive social change, that's where we put our money and our effort. Is making sure we don't fuck up the next generation. Right? Now, what that looks like exactly is also going to be a question we're going to talk about in the future. For example, does making sure the next generation succeeds means messing with their genes and making them strong and fast and smart before they're born? Should we lean into that? Well, we're going to talk about it. Think about it. And finally, you might ask, if you're of a different political persuasion, look, the ethics of care, they're over-exaggerating how bad the situation is. Maybe things really aren't that bad. I mean, if you talk to somebody who is on the right side of the political spectrum, or a classical liberal, for example, they're generally going to say, compared to other countries, we have it really fucking good. Maybe this is an over-exaggeration born out of wealth and luxury. We're starting to care about smaller things because we actually do have a lot of crap. I don't know. I'm not telling you that's what you should think. I'm just telling you that is a view. So, if there are any weaknesses to this view, these are the ones that came to my mind. Just as there are weaknesses with every other view that we've looked at, right? Okay. Does anybody have any final questions, concerns, or comments? Yes? Anything that you have to do when? Before next class, it's Thursday, right? Just do the reading. That's it. Okay, thank you very much. I hope you all have a great day.